like even some of the shows you did with Tough Crowd and all, it did feel like the guys on the corner. It felt like guys standing around the corner, wasting time and just having fun with each other. You know what I mean? Enjoying themselves.
You could argue that's what stand-up comedy is. I folks ready to waste some time.
Yeah, really. Well, there is a certain, I think, truth to that.
Yeah.
That people can show up and be in a place that used to be about community, and now you kind of have to go out and pay for it a little bit. You know?
Wow. That's good and sad. It's stand-up, they go, folks, it used to be our community, now you got to pay for it. You want that full sense of bonding and connecting with your fellow human beings? This ain't the ancient Greeks. You fucking pay. That's good. That's good. Well, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and actually,
but it is a community.
Yeah.
When you go on the road, you know, you'll be in there in a club, and you'll be like this one drunk, and the whole crowd's like, Joe! And well, how about those people that run the rip-off business?
Yeah.
That's Bill. He's like,
But really, when you would hang on the corner, there were only some guys that could only do like 10 minutes. There would be like an opening act.
That's right.
Shut up.
That's
you
right.
know? Or somebody would be telling a story and somebody else would come along and you get bumped. Like,
wow.
This guy's better.
That's exactly right. That's so funny.
Yeah.
You're right. And somebody would come along and just, exactly. Yeah. It was definitely everyone sitting on the stoop.
Right.
And then some guys would come and hold court for a little while, but they had to,
But to take that from Brooklyn, where you're hanging out with your friends, to come over in Manhattan with doing the comedy clubs, you know, Woody Allen has kind of made a career of how that's a totally different world. It's a totally different thing to do for, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely. Well, it was definitely. I was just thinking about a guy from Long Island that disproves all these theories. This kid I knew named Al Cantor. I went to Stony Brook University.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Stony Brook for a year. This guy Al Cantor used to come in. He was from Massapequa, Long Island, the epitome of Long Island, and he would come in and tell stories to us. He worked in the ambulance corps, and every story he told was so funny, and he could have been like a genius comedian. It was like every story was like a 20-minute story with little digressions, and that guy was like, but I wonder why he never became a comedian. But it was just so interesting that, like, he was a guy that had, but also he worked in the ambulance corps, so he always had a good story from that night.
Sure.
My advice to anyone getting into comedy would be get an interesting job for 5 years.
Right.
Because the big problem with comedians is we're all, like, trying to be, everybody says the same thing. I just want to quit my day job so I can write full time.
Yeah.
And then they're sitting there with no day job writing, and there's nothing to write about. Hey, did you ever get up at 11:30 in the morning? It's like we waste all these years, you know. If I had known that, you know.
Well, it is true because all the novelists would always, you know,
right.
the more of a background that you had, like it took Kerouac like 15 years to get published and it was the best thing that happened to him.
Right.
But then you go see stand-ups and they're all like, when the maid wakes you up in the hotel room.
Right.
And a normal person is out of the hotel room at 8 o'clock in the morning. You know, no one's ever been woken up by a maid that works a regular job.
By the way, I like the fact that Ron goes, Kerouac got published 15 years later, best thing ever happened to him. Of course, he died of alcoholism 3 years. But 3 years after getting published, he died of alcoholism. I guess we have different ideas of the best thing that ever happened to a guy.
But at least he had those books.
Yeah.
Because if he would have been published at 21,
right,
you know, he might have been dead at 24.
That's right.
A lot of people, that's the worst thing that can happen. Like, oh, you got everything you want.
Sure.
Yeah, you got everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And like you said, comedy is a perfect example of, you know, and what you were asking about when we first started the clubs and going to transition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was so... I was so naive. Everybody was, but I mean, I just remember being online. And of course, I was online almost every week. Chris Rock, Adam Sandler. I mean, we were online all the time. We all knew each other from the lines of trying to get auditions. Because they'd actually, on Monday nights at the Strip and the Catch a Rising Star, they would actually, if you waited online and you got there early enough, you know, you have to wait online like 6-7 hours. So we all knew each other. And you get a spot, you know, you get like a number, and then you get on late at night. And, but it was like, and then going on there and then walking off like, how could I not have passed? I remember the first time I auditioned at Comic Strip, I went on and I did pretty well, you know, despite my bombing throughout my comedy. It was like my first set, I was excited, the crowd, and the MC came up to me, once again, comedians, being my biggest fans, the MC came up to me afterwards and goes, "You're a natural, come back in a year." And I was like, in a year, I'll be on, like, TV. You better get me in.
Right.
But of course, you should have said, come back in 5 years.
Right,
10 years. Because it takes that long before you even understand your own voice or whatever, you know?
Well, did you ever think it might have been better if you weren't in New York at that time, that you were out somewhere that you could have, you know, had a shorter line? or?
Yeah, in some ways it would have been better. I mean, for me it was better because, but I mean, then I would go on the road, like the few road gigs I got. Like I remember going to North Carolina, I had like 3 minutes, 5 minutes on the subway. So they're looking at me like, hey man, we don't laugh at that, we don't have the subway. So it taught you a lot of lessons from going on the road too. But yeah, probably would have had more time if I'd been on the road. But the good thing about New York is you really learn like the rules of like what's hack. Like a lot of problems with the road is a lot of guys will work out, but they'll be doing stuff that's quote unquote hack, depending on the era. What's hack then is not necessarily hack now. But so in a way, New York at least it cut through. I didn't have to worry about that part. Then coming to New York and having everybody think I'm a hack.
Right, sure.
A lot of really funny guys, but just because they weren't exposed to everybody night after night the way we were, so that they had to relearn certain things,
They didn't know that some of these topics were already beat to death because
they're going on the road by themselves every night. Everyone's laughing, so how would you know,
So when you started to get on at the clubs, how long before you thought to yourself, yeah, I'm going to stick with this. This is
like I said, it was that night that really changed how I felt. Before that, I would go through ups and downs. So I'm like, hey, this is good, but I was never a good comic for years, for years. Even when I was on MTV, and even then, I'd go on the road, and I was not a good comic, I was okay. I had some funny things, and I was a funny person. Like if I worked a crowd, I'd be funny, but I was never a good comic for years. It took me years to really learn. It took me 10 years.
Now,
I'm a comedian.
How did you get on the MTV? How did you get from you doing?
Just because of my voice. They heard my voice. I was at a club. I was like well known in the city. Like I said, among the comedians in the city, I was like an up and comer. So I got good spot. I got all the things that people would want in comedy in New York at that time, which was I'd get on at the clubs a lot. But I was very hit or miss on the clubs. But they were looking for people for MTV, and they just heard my voice. They're like, wouldn't he be funny to be like the announcer because his voice is, so grating. And
so you got on there, and even though you didn't feel like you were polished, you weren't ready, there was something really likable about you on that show that people that watched the show kind of went, I get this guy. I think this guy would be fun to hang out with.
Yeah, that's what everybody said. They said, he's the kind of guy you want to have a beer with.
Right.
Meanwhile, but I used to smoke on the show, too, like the first year. I used to smoke on TV.
Yeah.
And I cut that out of the first season. But I was just chain smoked. I used to smoke 3 packs a day. So I was always smoking anyway. So it wasn't like I was trying to smoke. I was just always smoked. So I was like, I'm going to smoke on the show, and it's funny, But it was,
Eventually they caught up with it and said, wait.
Yeah, after the first season, they're like, hey, stop that.
Yeah, the show's too popular.
Yeah.
Kids are watching.
When kids are like your little kids are watching it. And I remember a kid coming up to me once a couple of years later going, hey man, you're the reason I started smoking.
So that had to be, that is crazy because once you're in clubs, right?
Right.
And you're working to nothing but adults that are drinking. Like you said, now little kids are watching the show. It's a totally different world feel.
Yeah, totally.
And the show was really like young people running it, young people doing it. We'd never seen anything like that before.
Right, exactly. It was like the first of those types of ironic kind of show that was making fun of game shows but being a game show.
Yeah, and Ken Ober was, I thought, just one of those people that was just perfect. I mean, just talking about a guy doing exactly what he should have been doing at that age.
To do that kind of a job, like a game show host, and make it hip.
Right.
Nobody could have done that but him, or at least nobody I knew.
Yeah, and at the same time, people that don't get like the broadcasting aspect is like he's making fun of broadcasting as he's broadcasting.
Right.
He wasn't breaking the rules of broadcasting. Everything got done.
No, exactly. He ran the trains on time. It was amazing. I just went to another memorial for him. He died. And I went to one they had in Hartford, Connecticut last week, and it was all just the friends that grew up with him this time. It wasn't all the Hollywood. First, I went to one in L.A., and all these comedians were like talking about how brilliant he was. In fact, Dennis Miller again. One time, him and Ken Ober were but this is where Dennis is
nice,
being good, and him and Ken were having like they had never met. Like this is like 1991, and it was like these two gunslingers because Dennis Miller was considered like the reference, just like throw a reference on top of. And Ken Ober, if you know, he was like that too. And then after a minute, they just met, and Dennis Miller just turns to me and goes, "Quinn, this guy's pretty fucking good," because he was like so G. But all his friends were talking about growing up with him and what it was like to grow up with a guy like that.
So did you guys at that point? You're all young, and all of a sudden this thing is popping, and MTV had a lot of power in those days. I mean, it really did. So it had to be like being in a band there for a couple of years.
It was like that. Actually, it had a lot of power. This guy, this reporter named Bob Green, who was like some famous guy.
Oh, sure, in Chicago,
yeah. And he came up to me one day, and we were in spring break, and he goes, I can't believe, he goes, all these cameras from NBC and stuff, these kids don't give a damn, but when MTV comes, they like have total reverence, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
And so it was like that. It was like MTV. We were just, it was ridiculous. I remember one time we were at a strip club one time, and and all the strippers, it was like our first, like we just were starting to get the idea, like we're well known. Like Kenny had been out in some college thing, because nobody over 22 knew who we were. Everybody that knew us was 21 or under. So it was so weird. Like we'd walk around the streets of New York, and all these kids would be like, ah, and all these adults were like, what is that?